Welcome back from break. I'm Esther McGinnis, Extension Horticulturist and Director of the Master Gardener Program. So we're here to talk about beautiful landscapes, building a pollinator garden. So this is our big initiative for the Master Gardener Program this year, and we are hoping to encourage all of you to plant a pollinator garden. And the reason why is that pollinators are in trouble. So I'm going to give you the bad news first. So we have our monarchs. You've certainly heard about them and how their populations have plummeted. You've heard about our honeybees and colony collapse disorder and winter kill. That's been on the news a lot. And then we have our native bees. Many species are going extinct. But although there's a lot of bad news, it's not irreversible. The good news is that you can help. You can be the oasis in your neighborhood that nourishes your bees and your pollinators. So today, we're going to talk about what you can do in your own yard. What plants will provide a constant source of nectar and pollen from early spring through fall. How to provide the right sort of water sources and shelter. And then finally, how to use pesticides safely. So bee pollinators are very important in the United States. This is big business. They pollinate over $15 billion in crops. So 1/3 of all the food that you consume is bee pollinated. So 1 out of every 3 mouthfuls. So think about that. Now, 75% of our horticultural crops, our fruits, our nuts, and our vegetables either require a pollinator or benefit from pollination. So we have almonds. Almonds definitely require honeybees to be trucked around the country to pollinate that almond crop. A lot of our berries certainly benefit. The oranges that you eat. And then think about your vegetables, your cucurbits, your cucumbers, squash, your melons. So, if we did not have bee pollinated crops, we wouldn't starve, but your diets would be a lot less colorful and a lot less nutritious. So let me ask you a question all across North Dakota. Can a honeybee pollinate the tomatoes in your backyard? And I want you to vote. How many of you say yes? How many of you say no? The answer is a honeybee cannot pollinate your tomatoes. Now, tomatoes are partially wind pollinated, but they greatly benefit from bumblebees. So the native bumblebee species that we have all across North Dakota know the secret to pollinating tomatoes. They grab hold of that tomato flower, they vibrate their wing muscles, and that's called buzz sonication. And they're able to shake that pollen right out of the anthers to pollinate the flowers. And as a result, you end up with larger fruits and larger yields. So very important to have not just honeybees, but also to have bumblebees. So these are some of the crops that are pollinated by bumblebees. Now there's going to be some overlap with your honeybees, but this is why it's good to protect everything, particularly if you are a backyard gardener. You want to make sure you have a bountiful harvest of your fruits and your vegetables. Now, since we only have 20 minutes here, I'm going to focus on native bumblebees. So we have 19 to 20 different species in our area, and you're very capable of recognizing our bumblebees. They're very robust and they're furry. They're almost like flying teddy bears. However, I would resist the urge to hug them. So with our bumblebees, they have a very unique life cycle. We have queens that overwinter underground and they're pregnant. So they emerge about this time of year, sometimes into May, depending on how cold it is. Now, as you can imagine, with these pregnant queens, they wake up and they're hungry. So you need to feed them by providing spring flowering plants. So then as you nourish the bees, they will lay their eggs and the first female workers will be seen in June. The colony will continue to grow, and then in the fall, there'll be males that are produced. And their only purpose in life is to hang out, sip some nectar, gather some pollen, and mate with the new queens that will produce next year's generation. So very important to feed all the bumblebees throughout this entire life cycle. Very good to have flowers that bloom late into fall. And then as our heavy frosts come in fall, the whole colony dies except for those mated queens. Now our bumblebees are in trouble. Now this is different than with the honeybees. This is largely due to habitat loss. So with our bumblebees, they can't fly as far as the honeybees to forage for food. So our honeybees can fly, easily 2 miles to find a good garden, but not the bumblebees. They're limited, to maybe just hundreds of yards depending on the species. So we need to make sure that their habitat is hospitable and provides, flowers from spring through early fall. But if you look at our countryside, we have fewer wildflowers. And then if you go into our cities, we have large expanses of lawns that are weed-free. They can't even find a dandelion. Well, maybe in my yard they can. And then we get into disease issues and pesticides. So all this spells trouble for the bumblebees. So what can we do? We can provide flowering plants. So we can build a pollinator garden that will bloom from earliest spring through fall, as long as you choose that variety. So not only are you nourishing the bees and the butterflies, but we're making you look like a rock star gardener because you have seasonal interest through the entire growing season. Now, as you're choosing your plants, incorporate more native species in your garden. Native flowers have co-evolved with our native bees and therefore are more beneficial and may provide more nectar at the right time of year. That said, there are some non-native or ornamental species and cultivars that are beneficial, and I'll touch upon that. And then plant in drifts or 3 or more per species, so there is a bountiful supply in your garden. So all of you should have a handout. I can't go through all the species on the handout, but I want you to see that it is broken down into different seasons. We have April and May blooming perennials. We have June blooming perennials, July and August, and then finally fall perennials. And then I've got some abbreviations. B is for bee, BT is for butterfly, and H is for hummingbird. So you can choose plants from this list that will benefit the pollinators that you care about. First, let's start off with spring. And what are we seeing right now? We are seeing crocuses and grape hyacinths. These are 2 of the more beneficial spring bulbs that we have. Now, if you take a look at your crocuses that are blooming on a warm day, you'll see that they are absolutely covered in bees that are gathering the first nectar and pollen of the season. So these are very important plants. Now, they're not native, but that's okay. We're trying to provide an early spring food source. You are going to want to avoid tulips and daffodils in your pollinator garden. Tulips and daffodils have been so overly hybridized that they no longer provide the pollinator services that your bees value. So crocuses and grape hyacinths are better choices. And then we get into some of our native April and May blooming perennials. So we have pasque-flower that's native to North Dakota, and wild columbine that has those beautiful nectar spurs that have a drop of nectar at the base. Prairie smoke is blooming right now. So take a look and see all the native plants that are blooming. These are some that you should be including in your pollinator garden. And then wild geranium. Now we get into June, and golden Alexander is a beautiful choice for your garden. It's on the lower left-hand side. You have those flat clusters of flowers that somewhat resemble dill, but this is golden Alexander. This is a plant that is good for the bees and the butterflies. It's an important host plant for certain butterflies. On the right, we have Baptisia australis, or false indigo. See those beautiful blossoms? They look a little like sweet pea. Now, this is in the same family as peas and beans, but a stunning plant. Now, Baptisia is native to Minnesota, but I'm saying that's close enough for our purposes. So go ahead and include Baptisia in your garden. Now I have, and I absolutely love it. Other June blooming perennials that are not native, chives. So you can have an herb in your garden that will feed you and the bees. And then Maynite salvia on the right. So I'm sure many of you already have Maynite salvia. That's been on the market for decades, and it's been a winner for us. So a very reliable plant. Don't forget milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, or butterfly weed. This is native to Minnesota and South Dakota. This is a beautiful choice for your yard. We've got those gorgeous orange flowers, which is different than common milkweed. This is beneficial for your bees and your butterflies, so it has a lot of nectar that's produced. However, I would say don't plant this in the Red River Valley. This is a plant that is far better for western North Dakota because it likes well-drained soils. This will die on clay soil, so much better to plant this on a well-drained soil or a sandy soil. Which brings me to other milkweeds. I didn't know that milkweeds were controversial till I moved back to North Dakota. And it's all because of common milkweed. This has been labeled as a noxious weed in Cavalier, Renville, Sheridan, Trail, and Wells counties. That said, it's not on the state noxious weed list. However, I would not recommend planting common milkweed in your garden. And that's because it's a garden thug. You don't want to have a plant that is running all over your garden with its rhizomes and taking over. There are far better choices. Swamp milkweed, which is pictured here, is a better choice. Now, despite the name, it doesn't need to live in a swamp, but it doesn't like drought. So if you have a garden that is irrigated from time to time, this is a good choice. Now, on the handout that I'm giving you, you have a whole table of different milkweeds that are native to North Dakota, what sort of moisture levels they like, and the soils. So you can go home and study that handout and pick the milkweeds that perform best in your area of the state. Now, we're speeding through June. We're now into July and August. And oh, we have some beautiful choices here. We have Liatris, Ligula stylus, Northern Plains blazing star. This is an absolute butterfly magnet. And look how beautiful it is, those beautiful purple flowers. Now, I visited a garden that had several of these plants, and they were just covered in monarchs, but the bees also like them. Now, I want to show you an ornamental version of blazing star. This is cobalt. This is an improved cultivar. And I would say I would not recommend cobalt. I grew this for over a decade, and I rarely saw any bees or butterflies on it. This is an instance in which the native species is more beneficial than the ornamental. So avoid cobalt and go with a native Liatris. There are a couple on your handout. Culver's root, or Veronicastrum virginicum. This is an underutilized plant in our gardens. It is a prairie native, but this is a plant that looks equally at home in a formal botanical garden. So this picture was taken at Clemens and Munsinger Gardens in St. Cloud, a very formal, beautiful garden. And here we've got a prairie plant that looks at home there. So Culver's root, beautiful lacy texture to the leaves, and then we have flowers that look like white candles. So this is great for the back of your garden. It's about 4 feet tall. Echinaceas. Now we have a native echinacea species, Echinacea angustifolia, which we find across North Dakota. However, I find that the ornamental echinaceas, for the most part, are still very attractive to pollinators. I'm doing, with the help of others, I'm doing a perennial hardiness trial across North Dakota to see which echinacea cultivars are hardy enough for North Dakota. Now, as part of that, I've been noticing the pollinators, and they are so attracted to most of the echinacea, but there are exceptions. So you'll see that we have double-flowered echinaceas here. That means they have an extra set of petals that have replaced their reproductive parts. So these plants may not be producing nectar and pollen, or else or else they'll be blocking access to it. So I would watch the butterflies and the bees come along. They'd land on these plants, and then they'd gently swear. Now, if they're butterflies, you know, the swearing is quite gentle, but they were very unhappy here because they were not getting any pollen or nectar. So avoid double-flowered echinaceas. So the closer you can stick to the native species, the better you are. This is white swan, this is an old favorite, and this is one of the more durable of the echinaceas. Now we're getting into fall, and you remember what happens in fall. We gotta feed those male bumblebees, right? So they're so necessary for ensuring the next generation. So plant fall blooming plants. Once again, this is going to make you look like a rock star to have your garden going into September, October, maybe even November. My aster bloomed into the second week of November this year, and there was a bee on every flower because it was the last flowering plant in the garden. But there are other good choices. Even autumn joy sedum is a good choice. So, make your gardens beautiful spring through fall. Now you can provide water sources. So once you've fed them, they're going to need a little bit of water. You just need a shallow water source. Remember to put a few rocks in there so the bees and the butterflies can land and stay dry while they sip some of that water. Just make sure that you don't have mosquitoes proliferating in these areas. Provide habitat for them. Now we've got two kinds of bees. We have ground nesting bees and we have cavity nesting bees. So different habitats. With the ground nesting bees, you want to leave the ground undisturbed if you see that you've got a nest. And I'm not talking about those yellow jacket nests. I'm talking about, native bee nests. Leave their nests alone so that they can thrive. With cavity nesting bees, they need a little bit of a cavity like in this mason bee house. So these are solitary bees that will nest here and lay their eggs. The final thing is don't cut down your perennials in the fall because the actual vegetation will provide habitat for some of your overwintering bees. They will nest in hollow stems or will even chew the pith to lay their eggs. Now we're getting into pesticides. We need to be safe in how we use pesticides. And I'd say this is true about anything. We need to reduce spraying. We spray too many insecticides and fungicides. So if we can reduce the spraying of both chemicals, your bees will be better off. However, if you have a severe problem and need to spray something, choose the least toxic pesticide that you can. And then whatever you do, do not spray your blooming plants because you know that the bees will be visiting. So wait till after petal fall. Now, if you're going to spray, time of day matters. The bees are more active in the morning and the afternoon, and then they retire to their nests at night. So spray in the evening, about 8 o'clock at night during the summer, and that's far better. Now, a couple slides on the Master Gardener program and what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to be building 15 model pollinator gardens all across North Dakota. We want you to have places that you can visit and see all these beautiful native plants and ornamental plants and see how to build one of these gardens. So we're hoping this will serve as inspiration. And our inspiration is for you to plant a pollinator garden. So we are going to have the NDSU Extension Master Gardener Pollinator Garden certification. There's an application. This is open to all homeowners in North Dakota and will even allow homeowners in adjacent states to apply. The first 100 of you that apply and meet our qualifications will receive a free sign saying that you are a certified NDSU Extension pollinator garden. This gives you bragging rights in your neighborhood. So we're hoping that you'll participate in this. We sent out the applications to your extension agents. So if you didn't get an application, please ask for one. And if you like, once you've built your pollinator garden, post a picture on our website. We want to show all the beautiful gardens all across North Dakota. All right, so I'll wrap things up and I'll open it up for questions here.
Okay, thank you, Esther. Got a question here from Center. Will the monarch butterfly live on any of the milkweed varieties, or which would be best for them?
So the question is, will the monarch butterfly live on any of the milkweed varieties, or are there certain ones that are best for them? Now, the ones that I have listed on the sheet will, in fact, allow them to complete their life cycle. So it's best to choose the native milkweeds rather than some of the tropical milkweeds that are on the market. So I would stick with the native ones because those are the ones that have co-evolved with our monarchs here.
What's a good balance between pollinators and mosquito control?
So what's a good balance between pollinators and mosquito control? Now, I have to admit, I was a little appalled when I moved back to North Dakota and saw how we do mosquito control here. Here we're spraying, I believe there are various pyrethrins and whatnot that are being sprayed for mosquito control, and we're seeing that pollinators are being killed. Now, there are certain, actually more organic solutions on the market where they'll have bacteria. They'll drop pellets in these swampy areas, in these areas where the mosquitoes are breeding, and these organic pellets will in fact have a certain bacteria that destroys the mosquitoes. So there are better methods, and I would hope that our municipalities start to adopt those technologies. All throughout the Twin Cities, they're doing this type of work that doesn't kill pollinators.
Okay, if we're not supposed to cut our perennials in the fall, when should we clean them out in the spring?
So when should we clean out our perennial gardens? You can start cleaning them out once you start seeing the pollinators flying. So I'm starting to see the pollinators fly here in Fargo. They've been flying for a couple of weeks. So usually around mid-April or so, it's safe to clean up the debris in your gardens.
How about, will any of the small trees that Tom talked about earlier, will that work for pollinators?
I'm sensing this is a planted question from
Hey,
Tom
man,
Call.
totally not. Ransom County's totally guilty.
Okay, and the question is, are any of these trees good? And the answer is yes. So any of your fruit trees will be good for both the bumblebees and for the honeybees. So I actually have another publication that's coming out that lists, it recommends crab apples and apples and these other flowering trees as an early source of nectar and pollen.
Great. How can we get a copy of your PowerPoint?
So the question is, how can you get a copy of my PowerPoint? I am going to be sharing actually the expanded version of this PowerPoint with all the extension agents and with my master gardeners. So if you need a copy, it can be provided. This is meant to be a package program and to be shared all across North Dakota. So just email me.
Okay, Esther, what if we have a bumblebee nest where we don't want it? How can you move it?
The question is, how can you move a bumblebee nest? And you cannot. Now, I have to admit, I had a bumblebee nest under my front step. And at first, I was petrified that somebody would get stung. It was right by the front step, right by my flower garden where I worked. And I decided I was going to observe what happened before I took any action. So I worked there in that flower bed all summer long. I had people coming and going. Nobody ever got stung. These bumblebees are gentle. Now, the ones that have the worst reputation are the yellow jackets. And the yellow jackets are really extremely minor pollinators. So it's really the yellow jackets that are aggressive, not the bumblebees.
Okay, is Russian sage a good pollinator?
The question is Russian sage a good plant for the bees? Yes. Yes. So that's one I would love to have added, but there's only so much space. Absolutely love it for the bees.
Okay, how about, are marigolds good for getting rid of mosquitoes?
Are marigolds good for getting rid of mosquitoes? Absolutely not. No, and they're not good for getting rid of bunnies either. My bunnies came and ate my marigolds.
We'll talk more about bunnies later. How about hummingbirds? What flowers attract hummingbirds?
The best plant for attracting hummingbirds, in my opinion, are red-flowered bee balms. I was I got invited to somebody's house that had 6 large bee balms or monarda plants that were red flowered, and there were 6 hummingbirds fighting over these plants. They were actually almost vicious in trying to gain that territory.
So did you enjoy the fight?
I did. It was so cute. They would they would go up and their little beaks would hit each other, and you could hear it.
Sword fight.
Sword
cool.
fight.
How about, is forsythia a good pollinator?
Is forsythia a good pollinator? Not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen many bees buzzing around the forsythia plant behind my building.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Todd has a comment about Bacillus thuringiensis. That must be that bacteria for mosquito control you were talking about there. Okay.
Thank you, Todd. Yes. So it's one of the forms of BT that's used for mosquito control.
Okay. How about, are you still accepting pollinator garden grant applications? For, how about for the top 15?
Okay, for the top 15, yes, we are still accepting. Let's see, the deadline for our Master Gardener pollinator gardens. Now, these are the big gardens we're doing at the county level. The deadline is April 29th, and I have not received 15 applications. But please keep in mind that these applications require the cooperation of your extension agent, and they must have 3 Master Gardeners involved with it.
Okay, how about these other pollinator gardens? I want to be certified as having a pollinator garden in my backyard. Now, what criteria will you use to decide who gets the free sign?
So the criteria that I'm using for these applicators is that you're planting a couple of the recommended plants for each one of those 4 seasons. I have it all spelled out. All you have to do is check the plants that you have, and then state that you've got a water source and are using safe pesticide practices.
Yeah, and of course we want them to be in North Dakota as much as possible.
That's right. Although
very provincial.
We're not going to discriminate against people in South Dakota, Montana, and Minnesota.
You're very kind-hearted, Esther, there. And how the first 100? Okay, so that's good to know. How about got some more questions here? Also, I want to just say before I forget is that we didn't provide that information online to have a pollinator garden, but we have a lot of people online who are not in a county that's hosting it. So maybe we should post that so that our online participants can get access to that. So tomorrow I will on the Spring Fever website near Esther's presentation, I will add this information about how you can be certified as a NDSU Extension Master Gardener Pollinator Garden. Also, is golden currant a good pollinator?
Is golden currant a good pollinator? Yes, it is.
How about yucca? Is that a good pollinator?
Yucca, oh boy, we're getting really specialized there. I think that's a moth that pollinates yucca, so it doesn't really help the bees.
Any other questions out there? Any other questions? Last call for questions about pollinator gardens.
And yes, yuccas are native to North Dakota.
Okay, seeing none, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you, Esther, for that. Great. I really enjoyed that presentation. We'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to talk about vegetables.